King Janaka was wandering in his pleasure garden, and he heard some perfected sages singing, and this had a devastating effect on him. He realized that even though he thought he was living life to the full, he realized how misguided he'd been. And he seems to have experienced what Rama was going through at the beginning of the Yoga Vasishta. What amounted to a kind of depression, even, or a breakdown of sorts. But he knew the teachings. He knew the teachings of reality, of the infinite Brahman. And he realized that this is where he should be directing his attention. So he seems to have entered into this state of dispassion almost immediately. Dispassion is no longer being enticed by notions of an external world and investing your emotions and efforts in these notions. Vasishta continued. Seeing the king thus seated, engrossed in deep contemplation, his bodyguard respectfully approached him and said, "Lord, it is time to consider your royal duties. Your Majesty's handmaiden awaits your pleasure, having prepared your perfumed bath. The holy priests await your arrival in the bath chamber to commence the chanting of the appropriate hymns." So it seems that even the king's ablutions were quite an event. "Lord, arise and let what has to be done, for noble men are never unpunctual or negligent." But the king ignored the bodyguard's words and continued to muse. "What shall I do with this court and the royal duties when I know that all these are ephemeral? They are useless to me. I shall renounce all activities and duties, and I shall remain immersed in the bliss of the self." It's not the best way of putting it here. It gives the impression the king's maybe being a bit selfish. He's got all this bliss that he can get into. He can disappear into all this bliss within himself, and everything else can just go to pot. But is this notion of bliss that we've got here? We often hear about the bliss of the self. And I wonder what bliss means to most people, what it means to you, for example. For me, it conjures up a nice big cloud of happiness which you disappear into, and it seems a bit cut off somehow. And I don't think that's what's meant here, although it's very easy to get that impression. It might have been best if he just said, "I shall remain immersed in the self." This immersion, which is in pure awareness, is something which is devoid of all negative emotions. And I think this might be a way of understanding bliss, is a way of seeing it as simply the absence of any negativity, the absence of anxiety, of anger, aversion, all the rest of it. So it's probably just easier to say bliss than to say all that. Because in the next paragraph he talks about abandoning the craving for sense pleasures. And when you're talking about immersing yourself in bliss, it doesn't really seem like abandoning craving for sense pleasures, but it is. "O mind, abandon your craving for sense pleasures so that you may Be rid of the miseries of repeated old age and death. Whatever be the condition in which you hope to enjoy happiness, that very condition proves to be the source of unhappiness. Enough of this sinful, conditioned, pleasure-seeking life. Seek the delight that is natural and inherent in you. In other words, it's pointless looking to external notions for satisfaction. The only fulfillment can come from realization of your essence as pure awareness. Seeing that the king was silent, the bodyguard became silent too. The king once again said to himself, "What shall I seek to gain in this universe? On what eternal truth in this universe shall I rest with confidence? What difference does it make if I am engaged in ceaseless activity or if I remain idle? Nothing in this world is truly enduring in any case. Whether active or idle, this body is impermanent and ever-changing. When the intelligence is rooted in equanimity, what is lost and how? I do not long for what I do not have, nor do I desire to abandon what has come to me unsought. I am firmly established in the self. Let what is mine be mine. There is nothing that I should work for, nor is there any meaning in inaction. Whatever is gained by action or by inaction is false. When the mind is thus established in desirelessness, when it does not seek pleasure, when the body and its limbs perform their natural functions, action and inaction are of equal value or meaning. Hence let the body engage itself in its natural functions. Without such activity, the body will disintegrate. When the mind ceases to entertain the notions, I do this, I enjoy this, in regard to the actions thus performed, action becomes non-action. So the king's established in this awareness, and he's wondering how to proceed. And he expresses it in terms of action and inaction. We're caught up usually with the notion that we are doing things, and we do things to achieve certain ends. And so whenever we're doing something, what's implicit is our assumption that there's a real self operating in a real external world. And this fuels the notion of a separate self, a separate ego. So what the king is realizing is that he can actually carry on his functions, but without reinforcing this sense of a self, an individual self, doing things. So he's not going to. Initially, he seemed to be abandoning the idea of actions by not attending to his royal duties. But now he realizes he can get involved. He can carry on with his actions, his usual behaviour, without identifying with them. I think that's the key point. Without identifying with them, without putting some kind of investment into them. Expectations, investments in terms of expectations or hopes